right now we have the stadium, the football stadium, which I think which you want to talk about a little bit later, where for reasons best understood by the governor.
Or we can talk about it now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to do it.
Sure.
I'm delighted that the Raiders decided to come to Las Vegas. I hope the fans from Oakland get on Southwest and fly down here. But we don't need a $2 billion stadium. $1 billion builds a fabulous stadium. The Taj Mahal that they have promoted, to me, makes no sense, especially when we are 50 out of 50 in 3 surveys, 51 out of 50 in another survey on education. So why are we spending $750 million in public funds, tax revenues, to build this stadium? What's interesting is if I am elected, if I am able to get my hands in the $750 million, and I do have a way to do that. Then the Raiders, Mr. Davis, and Bank of America are going to have to come up with the financing, which is the way it should be. But I really question the Raiders' sincerity here, because they have committed $500 million. They'll probably get about $200 million plus in naming rights. They're going to sell seat licenses so that you can buy a ticket, which means that Joe Main Street isn't going to, might be up in a nosebleed seat somewhere.
Right. If that.
If that, yeah. Maybe they'll put big TV screens outside the stadium, and you can do your seat license. You can have a folding chair watching it from outside. It's just, and the way it's been done, it was rammed through the legislature. And right now, the financing package, part of it, I assume the Raiders will come up with the money. They'll obviously, at the end of the day, probably end up paying maybe $100 million out of the $500 million. B of A's plan is confidential, and this was the same nonsense that Steve Hill, who was the head of GoEd, which sponsored Faraday Future, he's now head of the Stadium Authority, put out with Faraday Future. So we're looking at plans. They say they have the financing. The Clark County Commission has gone through all the motions. Assuming I win the primary, Steve Sisolak, who's the county chairman, is the big cheerleader for this stadium. And nice guy.
Oh yeah.
But has no experience with state issues, and he's been the cheerleader for the stadium. But I asked Steve, what are you going to do about the education? Well, I'm going to promote it. That's great, but how are you going to pay for it? Well, we'll figure out a way. You're not going to figure out a way. So
I have a question. I read somewhere, I believe it was actually in Clark County's own debt report.
Yeah.
That it is not. Oh, it was an analysis by Fitch.
Right.
That basically said Clark County didn't have much wiggle room in terms of raising money for projects. So here you have the stadium, and you have a tax, stadium tax.
That's not bringing. It's a hotel room tax.
Hotel room tax, yeah.
Which is a clever way to do it, because technically the citizens of Nevada will not be paying for it. It will be mostly tourists. But this is public money, and the $750 million that are going to finance the stadium is $750 million that we have to get elsewhere.
And that's what I'm getting at. When I did my calculations, because of my background, to cut to the chase, I found that the current rate for a AAA, a AA bond, because the best rating you achieve is AA, is a loss of $252 million, which has to come out of the general fund because of the general obligation bond.
Right.
And that's where I went, Abe.
Yeah,
and I thought,
I don't think they're general. I don't think they're GOs, general obligation bonds.
That's in the law. They wrote the law that way.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, I was shocked. It's not a revenue bond. I was like, wow.
Yeah. Well, in that case, there's some issues.
See what I'm getting at?
Yeah. I mean, I think as I said, I assume that they would be revenue bonds financed by the hotel room tax. But if it is indeed a GO, if they're going to have to go back to the state,
and that was your friend and mine, the mayor of Nevada's point early on at the committee. Dan, what she wrote was, she said it needs to be a revenue bond to give us an option, because she said what's,
Mayor Goodman?
yeah.
Yeah.
She said, what happened? And she put this in writing, could happen, and here we are.
Yeah.
We're at a point where it's not bringing enough money.
Yeah.
They know it,
Yeah.
but they don't want the public to know it. And so here you come with your idea, which I think is great.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's.
Yeah, really, I think the financial management of this state is a mess. And it started from, Governor Sandoval passed his commerce tax. Then he wanted the bonds, which fortunately were not issued for the Phantom automobile plant, now the stadium. The Clark County School Board found itself, I think, $60 to $80 million short. This was after Governor Sandoval's $1.2 or $1.3 billion tax hike. And